The next thing we're going to look at is adding checkboxes to the screen. I'm sure you are all familiar with the checkbox and will agree it makes data entry for your users a very simple task. The checkbox is just another form of a parameter, and there's a rule that the checkbox always has to be of data type C, a character, with a length of 1. And the contents that get stored in that parameter will either be an X for when it's checked, or it will be blank. So let's have a look how we define a parameter. Let's get rid of the surname field. And we can add a new field. Let's see, what did we have in our table? Well, we didn't have one. Let's just define a standard field. Oops. Let's call this myBox1. And it's going to be of type C. So, we don't have to declare it. All we have to do is say the parameter name, then include as checkbox. And that's it. Simple, huh? Let's check our code. Activate, and then we can see it on the screen. Notice how this field is displayed differently to the other parameter fields? Yes, it's a checkbox, but the label for the checkbox is now on the right-hand side, with the entry field on the left. But apart from that, there's not much difference. If we don't enter a value, in other words, we don't click the box, then the myBox1 parameter, the variable, will hold a blank character. If we do tick it, it's going to hold a value of X. That's as complicated as checkboxes get. So now, let's move on and have a look at radio buttons. Now, radio buttons are another common method of controlling the values that get stored in our fields. A normal parameter field allows you to enter any value. A checkbox parameter allows you to enter one or two values, an X or a blank. Now, when it comes to radio buttons, they are very similar to checkboxes, but checkboxes, they are individual parameters in their own right, so you can have many checkboxes and select many checkboxes on the screen. But radio buttons have to belong to a group in which only one radio button can be selected at any one time. And the way we define radio buttons is very similar to checkboxes. They have to be of data type C and a length of 1. And because they belong to a group, let's say a group of 3 radio buttons, we would define 3 individual parameter fields. Let's have a look at an example. So we'll define a new parameter, but this time we structure it a little bit differently. Let's work with colors. So let's say we're going to define a radio button representing the color green. So we key in the parameter variable name, but then we follow it with radio button group to define we're making a group of radio buttons, and then we give the group a name. And let's just call it group 1. Then we define our second field. This time we'll define blue. Exactly the same thing. It's a radio button. Look at that. It's a radio button, apparently. There we go. And again, this belongs to group 1. Then finally, Mr. Yellow. Let's line them up as well. And again, that's part of group 1. Now, because I'm using the chain command with the parameter statement, got to have commas there. So that's it. That's how we define a group of radio buttons where we will limit the user entry just to one value in the group. So let's check our code. Oh, I do apologize. And it looks like I've gone a bit too long with yellow. So I'm afraid yellow is going to have to go. And we'll choose red. And we'll activate it. And now test. And as you can see, we have the radio buttons. And these follow the same conventions as a normal parameter, in that we have the label on the left, and then the entry field, the radio button, on the right hand side. And as you can see, by selecting any of the radio buttons, we can only ever have one value. Now that just about sums up the parameter statement. You've seen we can have normal input boxes, we can have drop-down buttons that define through the ABAP dictionary, we can have uppercase, lowercase, we can check the values, we can make them mandatory fields by using the obligatory addition, and also add default values, along with the checkbox and radio buttons. It's quite a good selection, and that more or less covers every sort of scenario you are likely to come across for individual field entry on a report screen. Now next up, we're going to have a look at something called select options. Now parameters, they can be looked at as simple screen entry fields, whereas select options, let's call them complex screen option fields. But they're not really complex, but they're super flexible and they have a lot of functionality built into them.